Chapter 6 of Clearing Weather. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jillian Pack. Clearing Weather by Cornelia Meigs. Chapter 6. The Great Enterprise. The great pistol went off with a tremendous crash, which sounded like the report of a cannon in that narrow place. The tall man flung it aside and bent all his strength to twisting free the wrist which Nicholas held clenched in both his hands. The boy could hear shouts and running footsteps outside. Then he heard Michael fling himself against the door. He and the tall man stamped and wrestled and fought all up and down the room, upsetting the table and smashing the drawing stool under their trampling feet. The sinewy stranger was quite evidently the stronger of the two, less agile than his younger companion, but not one whit less determined. Suddenly, he dropped the pistol. Taken unawares, Nicholas allowed it to fall clattering to the floor as he drew back, but not quite quickly enough. The other's long fingers had caught him by the throat in a strangling grasp which no struggling could unloose. Over his shoulder, Nicholas could see the heavy bolt which held the door bending and straining under the terrific blows which his comrade outside was raining upon the wood. With both his hands, he clutched and jerked at the wrists of his assailant, but he could do nothing to break that vice-like grip. He was sick, dizzy, beginning to grow limp in the other's inflexible grasp. Then suddenly, he saw the bolt rip clean away from the oak doorpost, and saw Michael, like a red-haired thunderbolt, come hurtling into the room. The tall stranger stepped back to face the newcomer, but his lean strength was no match for that tremendous power which dwelt in Michael Slade. The boy picked him up as though he were some great grotesque puppet, swung him back and forth to gather an instant of momentum, then flung him straight and clean out through the window. His comrade, Hezekiah, at the report of the pistol, had vanished from his place like a fleeting vision, for which the magic had been broken by the crack of the shot within. Michael wasted no glance upon the fate of his victim, but turned quickly to his friend. "Has he slain you?" he cried desperately. But Nicholas, sitting down giddily upon the edge of the overturned table, shook his head. He could not yet speak, yet he contrived a reassuring smile to show that he was still safe. Caleb Harmon, with a half-dozen others behind him, came crowding into the room and stood staring in amazement at the scene of upheaval all about them. Only then did Michael go to the window to see what had become of his late antagonist. "They are getting him into the boat," he announced. "2 other men, and are rowing him away. Caleb, have the watch called out, and tell Joshua Barstow to see that such a boat does not come to shore on any of the wharves. Let him send 2 or 3 armed men with horses to ride along the shore road, and prevent these rascals from coming to land in any of our coves. I do not care much whither they go, but we will take pains that it shall be far from here, and that they have a long pull before they find harbor." News came back presently that they had taken refuge upon a small sloop lying off Branscombe Head, had got up sail, and stood away northward. "I trust that they have had enough at last," observed Michael grimly, "but they can have more of the treatment at any time that they care to come back." Nicholas was hoarse for a space of days after the encounter, but otherwise had suffered no real hurt. After several days of watching his friends with most unhappy anxiety, Michael finally was somewhat eased and declared himself satisfied that no serious harm had been done. "You look yourself again at last," he told Nicholas cheerily, at the end of a week, "although I would that all this toil had not made you grow so thin. You will presently become as meager as Henrietta Sparrow." "You pay me no great compliment," his friend chuckled, "although I had thought that Henrietta's sharp face seemed a little less angular these last few times I have knocked at your door." "Yes," Michael replied, "she takes on, lately, some faint semblance of being a human woman. After all, For you must understand, my dear Nicholas, that Henrietta has yielded to romance, and has bestowed something which by courtesy we might call her heart upon a gallant sailorman, no other than Timothy Tripp." "Henrietta Tripp? That I can never believe," exclaimed Nicholas. But Michael assured him that the evidence could not be doubted. "He is there every evening in the kitchen, sipping a glass of thin punch, and when the nights are cool, has even the favor of a very small fire burning for his comfort. Henrietta sits opposite, knitting a gray wool sock, which can be destined for no larger man than Timothy. I seem to observe, as time goes on, that the punch seems to grow a little stronger, and the fire becomes a more hardy blaze, as though the nature of Henrietta were being softened at last by the influence of love. She is far less harsh to me, also, than she used to be, for when the Jocasta goes to sea, I shall be one of her officers, and Timothy Tripp sails with us at the mercy of my commands. She would never care to have a ship ruled with the heavy hand which she seeks to lay upon Mr. Hollister and upon me." The Jocasta was now so nearly completed that the day for her launching could be appointed, and the time might almost be set for the later date when she would put to sea. Tidings began to go out over the countryside that the combined venture of the people of Branscombe had gone successfully so far, and that there might be opportunity for the small merchants and for the most prosperous farmers to dispatch goods to be sold overseas. There came one morning to the counting-room a weaver from an outlying hamlet, not many miles from Branscombe. He bore upon his shoulders a great bale of smoothly woven canvas, the fruits of many a month of labor. "You will be needing sailcloth now, Master Drury," he said, "and I know well that there are not a great number of weavers in your town to fill the need in time." "What do you ask for your canvas?" Nicholas asked. The weaver, a shriveled gray-haired man, put his head on one side in shrewd calculation. 2 shillings the ell, if you pay me Spanish silver dollars," he said, "and 4 shillings if you pay me in Johannes. And if the price is in that cross money which the sailors bring home from the West Indies, I must have 5. "But how if we should offer you paper currency of the United States?" Nicholas inquired. "I will be honest with you, Master Drury, and trade you fair," he declared. "My good strong cloth is far better than your pictured paper, but just the same, I will make equal exchange, bale for bale." Michael, sitting on the other side of the table, laughed aloud. "Suppose we should tell you that we have no hard money left with which to buy your wares," he said. "Then I must even do as the shipwrights have been doing," the weaver answered. "If you will pay me a part of the value of what I have brought, I will look for the rest in the final profits of the voyage." His worn face brightened as he said further, "Can any of us, who have known Master Thomas Drury through a lifetime, fail to have pride in being taken as his partners into this, the venture of his finest ship?" These difficulties in the matter of money made endless stumbling blocks in the carrying on of business. The new country had no coin of its own, the government possessing never an ounce of gold or silver from which it could be minted. All sorts of foreign currency were in use among the colonies, while the government's paper bills, called with disrespect rag money, were valued at just the estimate which the weaver had put upon it. The powerless Congress had not been able to collect its taxes, and not so very long since it had even been forced to flee from Philadelphia to Trenton because a rabble of soldiers had gathered outside the doors of its meeting place, demanding the pay which a penniless government had been unable to provide. It was small wonder that prosperity was dead and commerce at a standstill. The colonies were still uneasy and jealous of one another. In the South were warehouses full of produce. Tobacco, indigo, and rice which could be sold overseas if there were ships to carry it. In New England, there were some few vessels, but of these, many were idle, because little had been produced at home, and the Southern planters were distrustful of their Yankee brothers in liberty, and would not hire their ships to carry their goods abroad. I began to understand that we do not know each other, the North and the South, Michael declared to Nicholas. We lie so far apart, and the way between us is so difficult, that it is only by chance that travelers from our colonies see or understand anything of New England. One or two bolder merchants of the country had sent ships far abroad to grasp at profit in a new field, the East India trade. From that venturesome voyage, 2 had so far come home. But these had been single efforts which had not roused the spirit or interest of many others. Such adventuring is a pastime for the reckless and the wealthy, people said. The greater part of American shipping still hung a dead weight on the hands of overcautious owners. No one can tell day to day what will come upon us tomorrow, was their uneasy excuse. A certain number of far-seeing men had dared to face the fact that with the clumsy, hastily formed rule of the Continental Congress, the country could never endure. There must be a new form of government, or there would shortly be worse than none. Even now, that gallant company was conferring in Philadelphia, striving to bring about some lasting plan for binding the colonies into union. The post-rider brought news day by day of what was going forward. Only rumors, it is true, for the councils were carried on behind locked doors. Now they were said to be coming to some agreement. Now they were quarreling. Now they were on the point of dispersing and returning to their homes. The fate of the new nation hung in the balance of their judgment, and no man could know what the end might be. We can only serve our land as stoutly as we can, Michael said with a sigh to Nicholas, when they had been discussing these grave matters. Whether she will stand or fall depends upon the total of victories or of defeats in these multitudes of battles which we are all waging against the forces of circumstance. Nicholas was less able to speak of those same thoughts within him, but he was none the less steadfastly resolved to maintain that same struggle. Yet even beyond the countryside obstacles to prosperity, he found others, smaller but equally menacing, which tended to block his progress. Certain merchants in some of the larger towns had been asked whether they would put goods into the new overseas venture. They had all answered no. Only one of them had told his reason plainly. It is an ill matter to have business with a man on the edge of ruin. We all think well of Thomas Drury, but we have the utmost we can do to keep some measure of prosperity ourselves. We cannot be dragged down by another's ill fortune. Those men from whom it was necessary that Nicholas buy supplies flatly refused him credit. We must see your money, they all declared. Yes, Thomas Drury was long our good patron, but we dare not help him now. We must help ourselves. In all these refusals, Nicholas and Michael both could read something more ominous than mere lack of courage and generosity. It is Darius Courland, Michael had finally exclaimed, and Nicholas had nodded. There was nothing more easy than to keep afloat the tale that Thomas Drury still stood at the brink of bankruptcy. And Darius, traveling back and forth from town to town in his chaise, knew just what word to drop in this man's ear, what shrug and smile to add to another's half-expressed doubt. Only the people of low degree, those who had labored for Thomas Drury and had long looked to him for their safe living, still stood by him and his nephew. It was as the bent weaver said, as he turned to go, if what we could offer for this venture were measured by the regard and honor for Thomas Drury that dwells in all our hearts, then could no single ship carry the lading. But it is not so that matters run in this world. Thomas Drury was better after this long passage of weeks, but even now only able to sit in an armchair by the window, and not yet strong enough to attempt the passage of the stairs. He was a broken man, unable to turn his thoughts to any wearying matters of business. He could do little more than listen and smile and approve all that Nicholas and Michael had done. "I will not hamper you with my feebleness," he said. But he loved, none the less, to sit and hearken by the hour as Nicholas recounted every detail of the work going forward, save those few having to do with the night prowlers in the counting-house. Most especially, he seemed to take pleasure in the name of the ship. He used to sit repeating it softly to himself, "Jocasta, Jocasta," whether his mind was upon the vessel or upon his shining memories of the past was a thing no one could know. There was some secret matter brewing between Dolly and Phoebe, which seemed to occasion much whispering in corners and various unexplained activities behind closed doors upstairs. On being questioned, neither of the two would reveal anything save that Nicholas should know in good time. Some girl's nonsense, he pronounced it. He had so far little notice for the doings of girls as a whole, although he felt such great and protective affection for Dolly. Michael, whose eyes were more alert for the flutter of petticoats, and who had a more interested regard for a feminine kind as a whole, was quite extraordinarily tormented by the mystery, and often let fall words which showed that he was cudgeling his wits to guess what it could be. "The contagion is spreading to all the maids in Branscombe," he told Nicholas presently. "Such whispering and twittering, such secret conferences on the corners of streets, such fallings into a silence of nods and meaning looks when any of us pass by. Nothing like it was ever before seen." Even Nicholas, the absorbed and unobservant, presently began to see that indeed the palpitating mystery was becoming general. At last, greatest marvel of all, Michael came into the counting-house one morning and announced, "Henrietta Sparrow is in it." "In what?" questioned Nicholas, looking up from a letter, and bringing his attention back with difficulty from the question of how many running yards of canvas should go into the Jocasta's main topgallant sail. "In the conspiracy which has caused so much fluttering in the dovecotes during these last weeks," his friend replied. "When I went home last evening, she and your sister were whispering in the passage, and they stopped and gave me that same if you knew but knew all look which I have seen lately upon every girl's face in Branscombe. I will own that as Dolly and Henrietta stood together, there was some slight difference in their countenances, but the expressions upon them were exactly alike." Even Mr. Hugh Hollister, coming to see Nicholas upon that weary business which must always go with great undertakings which suffer from the scarcity of money, even the gentle lawyer said plaintively, "That minx of a Dolly has been upsetting my good Henrietta. I have had burnt porridge for breakfast 3 days in succession, and that is always an indication of something most grievously wrong." "Your good Henrietta is said to be in love," Nicholas informed him, chuckling at the impossibility of the idea. "So Michael attempts to tell me," agreed Mr. Hollister, "though I try not to believe it. A great misfortune it would be for me should Henrietta marry. Timothy Tripp has hung about my house for a matter of 20 years or so. Therefore, I am not sure that affair is any nearer settlement than it ever has been. This new disturbance has been manifest only in the last few days. It is Dolly, and some scheme or other which she has in her busy head. When I see women making plans together, I am always uneasy." "I can make nothing of it," Nicholas finally admitted to Michael. "Perhaps the girls are preparing some ceremony for the day of the launching." "No," Michael assured him. "Dolly has told me this much, that we are not to know of it until the Jocasta is almost ready for sea. It is Dolly who is at the bottom of it all, yet she can be persuaded to tell nothing. She has a tongue like a sphinx and a mind like a hunting hive of bees." Late summer was slowly ripening into early autumn, and through all the months the work had gone forward steadily. The Jocasta stood whole and stately upon the waves, ready at last for her launching. The carving of an eagle, which was to be her figurehead, was set in its place. Dolly was to christen the new vessel, The battered drummers and fifers of the Branscombe Patriot Company, who had piped and beaten their long roll for the victory of Saratoga, were to be at hand to attend the ship with music as she slipped into the water. All the townspeople, all the country folk for miles around, were to come to see the ship, their ship, as she took the sea. Michael and Nicholas had long busy hours attending to final details. Caleb Harmon looked as though the weight of the universe rested upon his shoulders. Phoebe, glancing out in an ominously cloudy sunset, told her husband and Dolly, nevertheless, that the coming day would be fair. Michael and Nicholas did not hear her augury. Nicholas was in his place in the little room above the wharf, still toiling at his endless accounting. There were very few who would ever know the tangled difficulties through which he had labored to find the money for the project of his heart. The men who had worked for little, but it was necessary for them to live. Timber and iron, copper and canvas, all had to be bought, and all must be of the very best. With that grinding toil, he and Michael had struggled through this portion of the work. What scraping together of dollars, what stretching of shillings, what squeezing even of pennies. And how Michael had helped him! How Michael had persuaded and cajoled the cautious or selfish men who hung back from any dealing with the half-ruined Drury affairs. What pictures he had drawn before timid eyes of the success of the project, of all the boldness that it stood for, all the good that it was to accomplish. Yet neither he, with his easy flow of words, nor Nicholas, with his deeply rooted earnestness, had ever spoken together of that resolution at the bottom of everything, to which they both had set their faces on the night of their first meeting. Yet in furthering their real end, each one had wholeheartedly done his share. Nicholas closed his ledger and went to the window opening to the sea. Although it was autumn, the night was still like summer, black and starless, but with long lines of the pale phosphorescent fire breaking on the beaches, clinging to the piles, fringing the curl of the breakers as they came rolling in. He listened intently to the cool washing of the waves as they came stealing up just below him. How plainly they were calling to the ship, and now she was coming. Whither would they carry her? Whither would these soft winds drive her? Had he built her so that, so far as man could contrive it, she would go safe? Had he, of a surety, put into her the very best that was in him? He knew that he had. He turned aside at last, closed the window, put out the candles, and went forth into the long counting-house. Someone arose in the dusk of the scantily lit room. It was Michael, waiting for him patiently, as he had so many times before, even though patience was no great part of his eager being. They did not speak, but went out together into the still darkness. The whole place was empty and quiet, with here and there, at a distance, a bobbing lantern or two, showing where the watchmen made their rounds. Better guard was kept now, since the adventure of the two marauders, but there had never been a repetition of that attack. More ominous sign of Darius Corlin's hostility had been that stubborn wall of disbelief and refusal which had ringed them in on every side where they had looked for help. But even that had not withheld success, for here was the Jocasta towering above them, the work of all 3 months, the fruit of caution and boldness, of discouragement and hope. It was the custom in the jury yards to step the masts before launching, so that the ship seemed almost ready for the sea. By unspoken consent, the two stopped to stand together under her bow, with the rake of her masts disappearing into the dark, with the upward lift of her bows and bowsprit, the sweeping curve of her stern. She seemed to be alive, looking far away over their heads, tense and listening, impatient of long delay. Nicholas laid his hand upon her smooth oak planking, almost as though he expected to feel life throbbing beneath it. The two stood for a long time, each thinking of all that ship was to bear away, over the rim of the world, past the unknown horizons of the future. "She stands for the whole of us, Nicholas." Michael said at last, and his comrade nodded. All they possessed, both of outer worldly goods and also of the things within, were freighted in that vessel. By their work together, they had come to be bound in such friendship as passed far beyond the hero-worshipping affection which Michael had felt for Etienne Bardot. They understood each other too perfectly to have need of speech. It was to himself that Michael said, under his breath, yet answering the stir in Nicholas's heart, "Lives, fortunes, and sacred honor." One other had come to say goodbye to her also. Someone moved close to them, hidden by the black shadows, then became vaguely visible, stepping into the open space where they stood. It was Caleb Harmon, bent and knotted with the hard toil of long years, laying, in his turn, a big work-hardened hand upon the planks he had helped to set in place. He too had come to stand, for a moment, by this vessel of theirs, on the last night that she was still the shipwright's, before the sea should take her. Neither minded that he had overheard the words which Michael had spoken for both of them. He volunteered no speech, and presently walked away into the darkness. His muttered words came back to them. Young hearts, young hearts. There was a touch of frost in the air next day, with the haze of autumn hanging on the hills and on the far horizon. There was warmth and sun, however, over the shipyards, where from the hour of early morning people had begun to gather. The town crier, Abner Hoxie, had announced the great event in his enormous voice, standing in the market square and ringing his great bell. But all the bystanders had merely laughed to hear him, for they had known the tidings long before. There was no dweller in the town, from those who could scarcely walk on account of great age, to those who could not walk at all on account of extreme youth, who was not to be there. Branscombe was a small, compact village, closely built to the very water's edge and following the crescent of the harbor line. It was at the northward curve of the shore that the shipyards lay with their docks and piers, just before the rocky land reached far out in the high rugged point of Branscombe Head. On that morning, every street in the village seemed to lead to but one point, the Drury yards where the Jocasta waited. Today, at last, all the roads into the town were full of travelers, since every one in that portion of the county was bound for the launching. There were wagons and carts. There were men mounted upon rough-coated horses taken from the plow. There were women seated on the pillions behind. There were chaises, and there were gentlemen in laced coats and cocked hats, riding their blooded steeds to the same rendezvous. Many a solid merchant from many a distant town had left his counting-house that morning, and drawn by curiosity, real interest, or old friendship for Thomas Drury, had come to see the Branscombe launching. "A strange venture," one would observe to another, as they met upon the way. "They say that every man who has worked upon the ship has a share in her, and that who knows how many score will have part in making up her cargo. I never thought the ship would even be built, but now they tell me that she will clear within the month for the West Indies and the Mediterranean. I trust she comes back safely and with profit." The usual answer would be, "If so, I may even consider sending a vessel to sea again myself. But in due time, a man cannot be too careful." A great deal of the talk upon the highway was about that assembly in Philadelphia, which had now come near to the end of its labors, and before very long would submit the new plan of government to Congress and to the people of the new United States. "There could be no worse moment for such an undertaking as the sailing of this ship," said a wise merchant to a friend equally wise, as they jogged along the road, side by side. "Here we have let it be admitted at last that our present government is worthless, and no one may know whether the new one will avail us better. It is no time at all for any prudent person to risk what little he has in commercial adventure." "You are right," responded his companion. "These are perilous times. He is a foolhardy lad, this Nicholas Drury, who, they tell us, is at the bottom of the Branscombe enterprise, yet somehow I begin to like his bold spirit. The heaviness of doubt, however, was in the hearts of the few, and gay hope was in the hearts of the many, as all gathered for the great event. They thronged the gates of the shipyard. They packed the open space from boundary to boundary. Wreaths of little boys decorated the tall piles of timber and lumber, or hung precariously from derricks and staging. Thomas Drury had been carried down from the inn by a group of stout-armed workmen who had fought for the privilege. He sat now in his great armchair at his proper place on the platform, built up near the vessel's bow, a white ghost of the man he had been, looking a little dazed by all the tumult, but with a happier face than he had worn for many years past. Dolly, Phoebe, and Caleb Harmon, Michael and Nicholas crowded close about him. Serene above them all, alone unstirred by the excitement of the moment, decked out with colored flags and streamers, the Jocasta waited for the touch which should set her free. At the last moment, the chaise of Darius Corlinde rolled up to the gates, and he got out with Joseph Ryle to stand on the outskirts of the crowd. Now and again he tried to speak in a low tone to this man or that who stood near, words probably still of doubt and disparagement. But not even the merchants, come from afar, had ears to heed him today. All were intent upon what was going forward. There was no speech-making and little ceremony. The Jocasta was duly christened. There was a moment of silence in which it was quite certain that every man who had served her through all the time of building must be saying something like a prayer within his heart. Then the music struck up, the thin high notes of the fifes and the steady rolling beat of the drums, which recalled, as nothing else could have done, the immortal sound of soldiers' feet marching away from home and hearth-fire to do battle for liberty. Through the drumming and fifing, there came now the noise of the beating mallets. They were driving home the wedges beneath the Jocasta's keel to lift her from the ground and throw her weight upon the slipway. The last one was struck into place. Then the men leaped back to safety. There ran a tremor through the whole length of the ship. She had hearkened to the sea calling her at last. With a movement as majestic as that of a king's daughter stepping forth in her robes of state, she glided down the ways. Puffs of smoke and flashes of fire attended her sliding course. So great was the friction as the tremendous weight slipped, with such apparent ease, down the course appointed. She dipped to the water, righted herself, and floated, a creature of the sea now, and never to be a land dweller again. A roar went up, to which that first cry which had hailed the plan for building her was now as nothing, yet its burden was the same. "Nicholas! Nicholas Drury!" "It should be for the others, too," Nicholas protested, but the shout only gathered volume and drowned what he strove to say. Michael turned to the weather-wise Phoebe Harmon, who stood at his elbow. "Whither will she sail, Phoebe? And what storms will she see?" "Nay, sir, they can only be as God himself shall direct," she answered, "and may he bring her safe home to us again." At the edge of the crowd, Mr. Corlinde was turning away to journey homeward. Not far from him, a stout merchant was saying, with no very great heed that he should not hear, "I have never felt so greatly as I do today, the impulse to be back at sea, trading again. I begin to think that we have listened too long to croakings and warnings and overwhelming arguments. I, for one, am weary of having Darius Corlinde, in his bottle green coat, drive over me with his chaise and four." It was perhaps a busier month than any of those just past, the time during which the Jocasta lay at the dock, being rigged and equipped with sails, while at the same time her cargo was being got on board. A strange and miscellaneous collection of wares it was, which people day after day, some of them traveling from afar, kept bringing to Nicholas and Michael. Lumber, barrels of salt beef and pork, great round yellow cheeses by the hundredweight, and bales of linsey-woolsey cloth, the work of the weavers of half a dozen villages. There seems to be overmuch of blue and scarlet dye used. Nicholas observed to Michael doubtfully, as they inspected these last contributions. "They have heard, I think, that their sober butternut and russet do not sell to good advantage outside of New England," Michael replied. "I think we may well venture it, not for selling in the West Indies, but in some farther port which we shall visit later. There is nowhere in Europe where they weave just such fabrics as these of your colony." It was well understood that the Jocasta was to follow some such course as Nicholas had mentioned in his first talk of the matter with Mr. Hollister and Mr. Corland. The purpose of the voyage was not only to gain profit in known ports, but to seek out new markets for the future trade of America. And now, at last, came to light that secret over which Dolly Drury and her friends had been buzzing and whispering for so many weeks past. Michael and Nicholas had heard, lately, fewer hints of the great mystery which was in hand, and Michael, indeed, had observed to Nicholas that the countenances of the young ladies even began to appear somewhat downcast, and that their smiles and knowing looks were far less in evidence than before. The two had, in fact, more or less dropped the matter from their minds. They were taken entirely by surprise on that afternoon when Dolly came walking down the length of the counting room with a great burden in her arms, which she laid upon the table before them. She was dressed in her best, with ruffled kerchief and scarlet ribbons, and with the tumbling curls of her dark hair drawn into the most demure order. Her bright eyes and the brilliant color coming and going in her cheeks belied the weighty and sedate expression which she had put on with as much care as her rose-flowered bonnet. It was with the gravest dignity of manner that she unfolded the brown holland covering of her bundle and said simply, "I have brought this to help make up the lading of the Jocasta. If you think well of it, there is much more which you may have." What she had brought was a great web of white linen, so smoothly spun and so perfectly woven as to have a sheen and beauty beyond the finest satin. Nicholas looked at it in astonishment, and Michael passed an appreciative hand over its shining surface. "Where I live, such linen as this belongs only to the daughters of great houses, and is laid by with lavender and lemon verbena in their marriage chests." "That is just what it is," cried Dolly, in delight that he had divined the truth so quickly. Her grave manner broke into 1,000 ripples of released excitement. "Where you live, I suppose the black women do the spinning and weaving, but here in New England, every girl, as soon as she is big enough to turn a wheel, is bound to work every day toward the filling of her dower chest. Sometimes they do the weaving themselves, sometimes it is done for them. But any maid would feel disgraced should she reach the age of 16 and not have the proper number of yards of linen laid by for her wedding day. While I am spinning, I seem to think about 1,000 other things than wedding days," she admitted in conclusion. "But I love to hear the whir of the wheel, and I have, so Phoebe says, good fingers for the thread, so I have quite as much as any other maid in Branscombe. But even though you should be so brave as to bring your wedding linen to us," said Michael, "this is scarcely enough to carry overseas." "Ah, but this is but a little portion of what I have. Brought it to see whether it would pass the muster of your and Nicholas's critical eyes. How much do you think a nimble girl can spin and weave during her growing years? Not only I, but all the maids of Branscombe are bringing theirs also. Cannot women take part in a merchant's venture as well as men? Have they not, sometimes, also a thrifty eye for trade? What made me first think of it was Phoebe saying that daughters could be like their fathers as well as sons." Nicholas looked down upon the roll of linen in some doubt, as an elder brother might be expected to do. But Michael was already wholeheartedly won over to approve the venture. "If there is enough of it," he declared, "it should be indeed most excellent for us to offer in the markets of the West Indies. There can be nothing like this to be bought and sold there. But there must be slaves to do all the weaving they need for the West Indian people of means," objected Nicholas. "And do you think," Dolly defended her plan stoutly to him, "that slave women can produce the same fair work as industrious young ladies making ready their dowries? You cannot tell me, Michael, that even on your own plantation, those good black mammies of which you have told us, or those bouncing Negro girls, can produce such a web as this?" "No, indeed," agreed Michael. "I've never seen the equal of this in all my days." "Nor can you make me believe," Dolly persisted, "that the fine ladies of the West Indies, dwelling in those great houses of which we hear, with their flowered courtyards and their polished mahogany floors, do not wish for such linens as may glad the hearts of housewives wherever they may go? And there may be even some members of your sex, Nicholas, who would be pleased to use the best cambric in New England for the ruffles of their shirts and similar furbelows. Have I not heard that they are so particular about their wine that they have it shipped at Oporto and carried out to India or China, and then back again for its proper aging in a vessel's hold? That many of them cannot take pleasure in drinking port or Madeira that has not doubled the Cape of Good Hope? I think men so choice as those West Indian planters and merchant princes may recognize something of equal rarity and merit for the adornment of their persons. Such wares as these we offer are never sold in shops or market stalls. They are hoarded and treasured, and passed down from one woman to another, generation by generation." She paused, breathless. "And you would part with all this?" asked Michael. "We can begin at once to make more," returned Dolly with courage. "It is only one thing in addition toward making the Jocasta the best laden, as well as the finest ship on all the seas. It shall not be our fault if she does not go richly cargoed to seek all of our fortunes. Nicholas still looks doubtful," she concluded. "But remember Dick Whittington's cat, and her value in the country where cats were unknown? You can bring this back to me, Michael, in the form of rubies and diamonds." And she pushed the web of linen across the table into his hands. "I vow that I will, or in something which you will like just as well," Michael exclaimed. "Amid our coarse cargo of beef and cheese, this will surely outweigh in value everything else." "But are you sure you have enough?" questioned Nicholas, convinced finally, but still hard-heartedly reluctant. "Come and see," Dolly bade him, and not being able to wait for his deliberate footsteps, she seized him by the arm and hurried him violently toward the door. "We are just like all good merchants, and I brought our wares for your most unbelieving inspection." They were not exactly so businesslike as she had boasted, these maids of Branscombe, who had offered their hoarded treasure for the support of the Jocasta's fortunes. They had secured a great hay wagon, drawn by Farmer Holstead's red and white spotted oxen. They had piled their bales high upon it, and had decorated their offering with wreaths and with boughs of scarlet autumn leaves. They had hung garlands of gay flowers around the necks and upon the horns of the oxen, and if it seemed as though their gift were decked out for the sacrifice, and as though some of the maidens appeared a little mournful of a parting with the work of their loving hands, it was all the more tribute to their brave spirits and to the persuasive leadership of Dolly Drury. "There is still more to come," Dolly explained, "but just for the first which we brought, we piled it upon the biggest wain which we could find, so as to make a glorious showing." It was indeed amazing what industry could produce. Wagon-load after wagon-load of the beautiful linens came rolling down to the wharf, there to be unloaded and the contents borne on board the Jocasta. Some young women had less to offer, some had more, but since they were all to be dowerless together, there was no reason for anyone to hang back. Henrietta Sparrow was the Croesus of the town. When she had emptied her chests and cupboards, a single cart could not bear away the whole of the spoils. "She was always telling me that she must spin and weave and make ready a little longer before she would think of wedding with any man," Timothy Tripp told Michael in a burst of tender confidence. "But I do believe some change has come over her, and she has made up her mind that she will have me at last. I have asked her, between voyages, for 17 years, and she has never failed to say no. But now she declares that if the journey of the Jocasta brings success, then she will perhaps think of altering her mind. How did it come about? What man can box the compass of a woman's mind?" Michael was now more occupied even than Nicholas, for it was upon his shoulders that the burden of their project was to fall. The Jocasta was to have as captain John Douglas, an old acquaintance of Thomas Drury's, a trusted and able man from the neighboring port of Melford. He was to bring his own first officer, Charles Brigham, and from his town also a number of the crew were to be drawn, as had often been the case upon Thomas Drury's vessels. "Branscombe built and Melford manned," was a saying current among seafarers as standing for the sum of desired excellence in a ship. There were, also, many sailors available in Branscombe who were to sail upon the Jocasta, very conspicuous among them being Timothy Tripp. His small body possessed quite extraordinary strength, and was also so agile that his feats upon the yards were a byword of wonder. He had sailed many voyages for Thomas Drury, but he was a somewhat pathetic figure now, grown with unnatural life ashore, as he put it, shabby and restless, and always longing for his true occupation. It was strange to see how his countenance now grew broader and more smiling, how his shambling walk was developing a swagger, as he came nearer and nearer to the day when he was to be upon his own element once more. Michael, who had studied navigation and gained experience during his voyages on the Du Frere, was to do the work of second officer, although he also was to represent the owners and take charge of selling and buying the cargo. With this portion of the undertaking, Captain Douglas would have nothing to do. "I've no use for figures, except in determining a position or laying a course," he declared. "I would sail a ship to the end of the world and back for Thomas Drury, but no one must ask me to touch the trading. With the dollars and the moidores and the guineas and the Louis, a man can be set fairly beside himself and have no wits for the day's reckoning." Preparations were at last ended. The rigging was completed, the cargo stowed, the Jocasta had been tried and found to equal her commander's most critical demands. Space had been left in the hold for goods that were to be picked up later, since Michael purposed to touch at Charleston and take on tobacco, cotton, and rice. As often happens between two who cannot live together in harmony, he and his brother found themselves in something like agreement when they were many miles apart and communication was by letter. They had arranged between them that the Jocasta should be the first northern ship to carry a southern cargo, a combination of effort for which the needs of the country cried aloud. After Charleston, they were to touch at French ports in the West Indies, since American ships were not permitted to sell goods to the British Islands. From the West Indies, they were to head most probably for Mediterranean markets, French, Spanish, Italian, and finally for those gateways to the Eastern trade, Smyrna and Constantinople. The American flag was to be carried far, so that all might see and understand that the new nation founded on liberty still endured. It is the custom with sailors that farewells be casual, and that he who is setting forth for the farthest port which the wide world offers must say goodbye as carelessly as though he were going for a saunter across the market square. "If you were only to go with us," Michael said to Nicholas, as he had said 100 times before, and with no change in his voice because this time was the last. "When a person knows what he does best, it were better that he do it," Nicholas answered steadily, "and it will be a task for us all to uphold what little prosperity we have until you come to port again. It is easier to go away than to be gone away from." That Nicholas could have told his friend, but he did not. Michael came up to the Blackbird Inn in the early evening to bid goodbye to Thomas Drury, for he was to sail upon the morrow. He, Nicholas, and Dolly walked once more down the garden, to the head of the marsh road. The plum trees were dropping small crimson and orange leaves, leaving the crooked branches bare for the first faint stars to shine through. The marsh, so lately full of flashing wings, swinging blackbirds, and the brilliant greens of summer, had now dropped into silence and the somberness of autumn colors. The wind sighed through the dry grasses, and the sea was very loud upon the shore beyond. Michael was to see and hear and feel that picture in his heart to the farthest end of his journeying. Next day, the tide did not serve until late afternoon, and there was bustle of preparation to the last hour. In that long room, where the two had worked together through such difficulty to success, Michael gripped Nicholas's hand and turned to the door without a word. It was the whole of their leave-taking. The Jocasta weighed anchor, spread, fold by fold, her new white canvas, swung out into the tideway, caught the evening breeze, and moved in slow beauty down the harbor. Those who stood on the wharf to watch her going saw her veer and tack and stand out to double Branscombe Head. Now she was close-hauled, moving away from them with her sails showing edgewise and crescent-shaped, her masts dipping as she rose and fell to the long rolling swells. Long after the others had taken their way homeward, Nicholas still stood watching her, a distant fleeting vision, slowly disappearing across that vast plain, so enormous in the twilight, whose far boundaries touched the edges of mystery. The last sunset light had touched her as she swung about beyond the point, showing once more, and finally her clean grace, her fair white spread of new sail, her fresh, untried power. She was his. Others had aided in bringing her into being, but not as he had done. Without him, she would never have been planned, never have been carried to completion, would never have put to sea. There was no vanity in that surge of satisfaction which went flooding through him, only the honest pride of one who has put his best of dreams and labor into a certain task, and has seen them take enduring form before his eyes. No matter what was to come in that blind space called the future, be it pain, disappointment, or tragedy, nothing could take from him this moment in which he watched the live beauty of that ship as she sailed away, to feel that this was the work of his hands, to know that work was good. End of chapter 6.